Hi guys, Olive here. Happy New Year. I'm here today to talk to you about all the books that I read in December of 2016, what I am currently reading, and what I'm hoping to read for January of 2017. The first book I read in December was one that I wasn't actually planning on reading. I had requested that my library purchase a copy on audiobook, and then it suddenly became available, so I nabbed it. That was Talking as Fast as I Can by Lauren Graham. I listened to this over the course of 2 days. It was extremely short. In this book, Lauren Graham talks about her childhood, where and how she studied acting, and it talks about what it was like for her filming the original series of Gilmore Girls. Lauren Graham actually went back and watched the whole original series, which is unique for her because she normally does not watch herself. But it was certainly interesting listening to her impressions of going back through the whole series. She says that she doesn't have a whole lot of memories of the filming because it was so chaotic. They had to memorize so many lines. She also talks about her experiences filming the show Parenthood. So if you're a fan of hers from there, you are not forgotten. And then of course, most excitingly, Lauren Graham talks about what it was like to film the Gilmore Girls revival. How emotional she was during the filming and how much it meant to her. If you are planning to see the Gilmore Girls revival but have not yet done so, I would certainly advise doing that before you read this book. She does give some spoilers for the revival and talks about her feelings about it as a whole unit, so you really need to have seen it first. Though the revival had its issues, no arguments there, I still really enjoyed watching it. This show means a lot to me, has meant a lot to me. I've been watching it since high school. It will always have a special place in my heart, and listening to this audiobook was just kind of the icing on the cake of the whole experience. The next book I finished was also an audiobook that I had been trying to work my way through since September. That was Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl. The main character in this book is a high school student named Blue Vandermeer. She has been moving across the country every single year, living in a new city, with her eccentric professor father ever since her mother passed away when she was very young. But it is now her senior year, and so her father decides to settle her down in a small town in North Carolina and send her to a prestigious private school. Blue gets forced into this elite group by a teacher at this school who takes a liking to her. This group of students has kind of a relationship with this teacher. She's kind of a mentor to them. She invites them over to her house to have dinners and discussions. This group does not have any interest in letting Blue into their group, but they reluctantly start to accept her over time. After a very long time, the book starts to spin into this weird murder mystery with a very polarizing ending that I cannot decide how I feel about. However, I did really like the tone of this book. There is a plethora of literary and pop culture references. It kind of honestly makes it similar to Gilmore Girls in that way. The experience of listening to it was, for the most part, enjoyable. I really did enjoy my time listening to it about 3/4 of the way through, but then it just kind of fell flat. But on a much cheerier note, after I had finished those 2 audiobooks, I started feeling this really intense pull toward Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding. This was technically a reread / re-listen, whatever the audiobook equivalent of that is, because I listened to it for the first time about 2 years ago during the Christmas season. This book really reminds me of the Christmas and holiday season, of course, because I listened to it for the first time around Christmas, but also because it starts on New Year's of one year and then concludes around the Christmas season of that same year. It definitely gave me the warm, fuzzy feelings all over again. This is not the greatest piece of literature. It is basically Pride and Prejudice fan fiction. Bridget is extremely neurotic and self-conscious, and the closer I get to her age, the more I feel better about myself every time I read this book. Not that I don't have self-conscious feelings at times and a desire for self-improvement, but Bridget is very all over the place, to say the least. It was a fun, enjoyable, quick listen. Again, it's not my favorite thing of all time, but it really hit the spot. The next book I finished in December, you will have already heard me talk about if you saw my top 5 nonfiction books of the year video. I'll link that in case you missed it. But that is Unmentionable by Therese O'Neill. This is a hysterically funny expose of how Victorian women really lived, with their dealings with everything from hygiene to picking the right dress to obtaining birth control and keeping a husband. The contrasts between the Victorian era and our modern day are really highlighted by the narrative style of this book. The author is writing as though she is your guide as you time travel back to this time period. So of course she references the difficulties that you would face as a woman during this time that you would not have in your modern day. The whole book is peppered with images with really crafty and snidey captions that had me laughing the whole way through. If this sounds as though it's something that might be remotely up your alley, I implore you, do not miss this one. This apparently is going to be a wrap up with pretty dramatic shifts from books I liked to books I didn't like, because the next book I finished in December was Night Film, also by Marisha Pessl. This was a buddy read that I did with Claire from the Book Fox, and while I did really enjoy chatting to her about this book, we both hated it. Claire actually called this book her least favorite book of 2016, which of course made me feel guilty. I will link that video down below for you if you've not seen her talk about this. This book started off with a ton of promise. It has a really interesting premise. A mysterious and secretive horror film director's daughter mysteriously commits suicide. A few years prior to this, a journalist, well-known journalist, was attempting to do an expose on this horror film director, insinuating that there were dark things in his past and in his present. This horror film director, Cordova, then serves this journalist, Scott McGrath, with a lawsuit claiming that he has made up all of these different things about him, thus discrediting him entirely. Then a few years later, when Cordova's daughter does commit suicide, this journalist is hell-bent on finding out what really happened to her. I will start off with what I liked about this book, because it's gonna get ugly. I really did like the effort that Pessl put in behind creating this cult of this horror director. She had this horror film director's entire back catalog of movies completely thought out. They each had a name, their plots were incredibly detailed. We got to hear about the actors that were in each of the films, what it was like during the filming of them, what each film's legacy was. It did make it seem like this was a real horror director that you could go and watch one of his movies on Friday night. His movies are described as being violent and subversive and not exactly for the mainstream audience. And so she also thought up and really built this entire underground following of him. I was very impressed by that aspect of it, and her writing throughout the whole book was enough to keep pulling me through it. It's one of those rare books that I'm not loving, but something about it keeps me going. That being said, I really wish I wouldn't have kept going. I think Claire and I both would have been better off if we had DNF'd this book. If I'm being honest, and I always am, I thought it was a mildly entertaining piece of trash. Our main character's motivations are never clear. He is not a very well thought out character. None of the people he works with are very thought out. He doesn't seem like a real person. He throws around money all over the place trying to solve this case, even though he is supposedly a disgraced journalist that no one wants to employ. Where is that money coming from? Cordova is supposedly this horrible guy who was accused of very rough, dark stuff, and yet, from all of the anecdotal evidence, he seemed like a pretty decent guy. Meanwhile, when the journalist is on this case trying to figure out what happened to Ashley, all of the accounts of her personality are wildly inconsistent. We never have any idea of who she truly was as a person. The book is way too long, way too long. Just when I thought it was over, it kept going, and for no purpose. All of the other types of media, the things that make this an illuminated novel, I thought they were lazy and used more as a crutch than anything else. I expected this to be scary. It was not scary at all. It was not even mildly unnerving, and I thought the ending was bullshit. The few elements that I did like, which were few and far between, made me give this 2 stars instead of 1, but I thought it was a complete waste of my time. Now that I have read both of Marisha Pessl's books and neither one of them blew me away, I do not know that I'll be reading any of her books in the future. The next book I finished was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is a classic book that I'm sure you have heard of before. It tells the story of a young Esther Greenwood who is spending her summer in New York City writing for a women's magazine. When she returns home from this summer spent in New York City right before she's supposed to go back to college, she falls into a very deep and very serious depression that dominates her life and dominates the rest of the story. I'll tell you right away, I gave this book 3 stars. I did like it, but I'm honestly sad because I think I could have used this book earlier in my life. I will very openly admit that I have gone through depression a couple of times in my life. I think this book would have been a comfort to me at those points to feel less alone in those really dark, suffocating feelings. But because I am so far away from those feelings now, it honestly made me feel at times uncomfortable to be back there in book form. I do think this book is very important. I highly appreciated her candor, which was remarkable considering when this book was published. Some of her prose is so biting and so on point that you really have to be like, whoa, no wonder this was subversive when it was first published. She has a really strong voice in this book, which I did really appreciate. I am not sorry at all that I read this. I just, again, wish that I had read it sooner. The last book that I finished in December was Affinity by Sarah Waters. This is set in Victorian London. There is a woman named Margaret who has been in a pretty bad way since the death of her father. She was very close with her father, and so to keep her mind off of it, to keep her occupied, she starts making visits to a prison called Millbank Prison. She is serving as a lady visitor, someone who provides companionship for the inmates, hopefully to provide them with some guidance. She starts to grow very close to one woman in particular who was a spirit medium who was jailed for an accident that she was blamed for. The book starts to focus on the relationship between our main character and this inmate. Meanwhile, our main character is still fighting a lot of demons from her grief and from some mental health issues. This book has very strong themes of spirituality, of kindness in the face of despair, and also of the shackles that bind us both literally and metaphorically. I read some reviews on Goodreads after finishing this book, which is something that I do pretty much after I finish every book. I like to see what people have said about it. And I did notice that a lot of people said that it was boring. I can see how some people would feel that because Sarah Waters' writing is very slow, but it is heavy with atmosphere. This one is also intensely dark. You do not want to read this if you are not in the mood for something dark and gloomy, as I always am this time of year. But if you are in the mood for a book like that, as I was, I think you will really enjoy it. I have had this book on the brain ever since I finished. I was actually hoping to read a couple more books before the end of the year, but I didn't want to rush into any more books because I just kind of wanted to sit with this one for a little while. Definitely one I would recommend. I have loved going through Sarah Waters' catalog so far. I am now halfway through and I'm really looking forward to reading the other 3. Then the books that I am currently reading that I'm hoping to finish up here pretty soon. The first being Radiance by Catherine M. Valente. I am really enjoying this book, but it is extremely challenging to read. It's hard to know what's going on at any point. I'm loving that it's doing so, but I am taking my time and really trying to savor it. Also, I'm on the holds list for a couple different audiobooks. I'm not sure when they'll become available. So on a whim, I decided to pick up the audiobook of You Are Not So Smart. This is a pop science-y book by David McRaney. I am enjoying it so far. It's reminding me a little bit of The Power of Habit, but we'll see how I end up feeling about it overall. And then the last book that's kind of a run over from my December TBR is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. I'm really looking forward to this one, so I'm hoping to get to it soon. And now on to all the books that I'm planning to read in January. The first is my pick for Russian History Retreat, which is Ivan the Terrible by Isabel de Madariaga. I did say in my goals video that I am doing this new Russian history project and that this year I am planning on focusing on the Tsars as well as Moscow and St. Petersburg. So we are not starting with the Romanos. We are starting slightly earlier than that with Ivan the Terrible. I am very excited to dig into this and then talk all about this subject in its own video coming soon. I'll be doing a few buddy reads this month, the first being Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I'm not sure who who all is joining in at this point, but hopefully I'll know soon. I'll be reading Moscow in the 1930s by Natalia Gramova with Stephanie from Time to Read. And I'll be reading The Monsters of Templeton by Lauren Groff with Kathy from Another Great Etc. Also, Winks from Winks and Ink is hosting a Sherlock Holmes readathon during the month of January. I will link her announcement video down below if you've missed that. I've never read any Sherlock Holmes before, which I think is a travesty. I desperately want to. So my husband has the 2-part collection of all of the Sherlock Holmes stories and novels. So I am planning on reading A Study in Scarlet's. And then if I get along well with that, I might move on to the short story collection, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I did a little bit of research online, which suggested that that might be a good place to start. So I'm eager to see if it is. And then for my last TBR pick, I did mention this on my goals video as well. I'm going to be picking a random book off of my TBR. Your to-read shelf on Goodreads does automatically sort your books from the time you've added them, so each one of them is assigned a number. I'm going to go to random.org, pick out 3 random books using that number generator, and based off of those 3, I'm going to pick between them for my random choice of the month. The first number was 578, which corresponds to a book I already had on my shelf called High Strung by Quinn Dalton. The next one is one that I do not own. It is called Russian Roulettes: How British Spies Thwarted Lenin's Plot for Global Revolution. I'm probably going to err away from random picks dealing with Russian history since I have an ongoing Russian history series now, but let's see what option number 3 is. The next one was number 546, which also corresponded to a book I already have here on my shelves called Balkan Ghosts, A Journey Through History by Robert D. Kaplan. While I am interested in all 3, I think High Strung by Quinn Dalton will be a very fast read and will hopefully offset some of the darker books I have picked out for myself this month. So there you have it. Those are all the books that I read during the last month of 2016, what I am currently reading, and what I'm hoping to start off the first month of 2017 reading. If you have any comments about these books or about anything in general, you can leave it down in the comment section below, or you can find me a variety of places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles are in the description box below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and once again, Happy New Year. Bye.